We all know that the first job of a doctor is to make a correct diagnosis. When we go to him or her and there's something wrong with us, we want that diagnosis to be correct. That's why I don't go to the doctor. For that very reason, many people avoid the doctor. There's that fear within us that we might hear some bad news. We might hear that we have to go through some type of a surgery that we don't want to undergo. We may have some serious disease, and it may upset our life. It might turn our lives upside down. And in spite of this natural hesitation, when a person does get that diagnosis, it can bring relief. I finally know what's wrong with me. And once we kind of have that relief, those first steps of a cure can begin. That medication can begin to take work in our lives and bring us back to full health. The prophet Isaiah, he gave a profound and a very penetrating diagnosis to the people. And it's not one that the people wanted to hear. They, of course, knew something was wrong. They could see that things were beginning to fall apart in their world. They had become easy prey to their enemies. But they hoped that that prophet would give them maybe something just a little softer to hear, something a little bit more palatable, something that they could understand and kind of have sugar-coated in a way. But he didn't mince words with them. And here's the diagnosis that he gave them. All of us have become like unclean people. All our good deeds are like polluted rags. We have all withered like leaves, and our guilt carries us away like the wind. Those were strong words that prophet used. He didn't have the gentlest bedside manners, if you will. When we are diagnosed with what's wrong with the people, he didn't hold anything back when he spoke to them. He's saying that even though the people's external behavior appears okay, inwardly, those people become unclean because of their sin and going against God. And these effects were now being shown in what was happening. Our good deeds, he says, they become like polluted rags. Now, all this sounds maybe a little bit somber, maybe even a little bit pessimistic, but it had a good outcome. The people heard what Isaiah had to say to them, even though they didn't like it, even though they didn't like the diagnosis, but they took him seriously and they humbled themselves. They didn't get trapped in their guilt, but they started working together. And in the end, thanks to that good leadership, they began to rebuild the temple. It wasn't the same temple that they had before, but they laid the basis for something more important. Precisely what we're waiting for during this time of Advent. They began to prepare for the coming of the Messiah. Advent's a time to draw us closer to Jesus who is the doctor of your soul. We have to open ourselves to his diagnosis. He's the one who has the remedy for any problem, any illness that we're facing in our life. Christ has the remedy. I read a story that illustrates what Jesus can do for us. It's a true story about that great scientist, Dr. Louis Pasteur. And among all the many accomplishments that man had, he developed the rabies vaccine. It was in July of 1885, a family brought him a boy named Joseph Meister. A rabid dog had bit this young boy, and he was now suffering, and they begged Dr. Pasteur to find a cure. We just want our son brought back to health. Please help him. Dr. Pasteur not only perfected the vaccine, but he's seen that family's desperation, and he decided to make an attempt. And after several weeks of treatment, the vaccine proved successful. It's the same vaccine that we have today. That boy's life was saved. And how many other people in our world who have been affected by rabies have been saved? As Dr. Pasteur did for that young man, Jesus wants to do for us. We've been bitten. We've been bitten not by a rabid dog. We've been bitten by sin. Something more powerful. Before we can receive Jesus' cure, though, we have to be willing to accept the diagnosis. We have to realize that we are sinners. We have to humble ourselves before our Lord. Today, we're going to light that first candle of our Advent wreath. That candle, it represents the light of Christ that can show us the true state of our souls and can bring us the cure that we need. In this Advent season that we begin today, are we prepared to open up our hearts? Are we prepared to get the diagnosis and get the medicine that we need to cure our hearts and souls? The doctor is waiting to give a diagnosis. Are we prepared to accept it in our lives?